health, and thoughts and prayers are with you all out there. We live in a crazy world right now, and I just want to send out my condolences, and that hopefully, the shit will stop over there in the Ukraine and Russia and with everybody. So, anyways, that's not my show. My show is Wicked Weather. We talk a lot about the weather extremes, all different types of weather outcomes, and what goes on in the weather department. My friend Joe DelliCarpini works for the National Weather Service. He's a meteorologist science operations officer at the National Weather Service in Boston, and he's a fill-in guy at the Boston Center, DBW. Maybe Joe can explain that when he comes on. I don't know what DBW is. Anyways, he's also in the Aviation and Decision Support Focus. Joe was born and raised in sunny Oswego, New York. So he's a sunny Oswego alumni. So that means he went to sunny Oswego College. So we're going to talk to him about that, about what goes on in sunny Oswego as far as lake effect goes, because he's right there in the lake effect belt. We're also going to get into a lot tonight about nor'easters and hurricanes, and I got a bunch of questions for Joe. So without further ado, enjoy the show, and I'll welcome my friend Joe DelliCarpini to the show.
Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Joe, how are you? Thank you for coming on my show tonight. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
It was nice coming down to the National Weather Service down in Taunton, Boston. Although it's a small office, it's very complex. You guys have a lot of equipment in there. Why don't you tell the listeners out there what actually goes on inside the weather office?
Sure. Well, we're a 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week operation. So we always have folks on duty there. During the day, we have 2 forecasters and another support person who really primarily does data collection, answers phones and media requests. And at night, we have 2 folks on. But, of course, we staff up when we get into either severe weather or winter storms or hurricanes. But our primary job there is really the issuance of severe weather warnings for the protection of life and property. So that's really why we're there all the time, keeping an eye out for severe weather, whether it be severe thunderstorms, flash floods, tornadoes, winter storms, hurricanes, whatever. Our secondary job is really what everybody sees from us, and that's the forecast end of it. And people will say, well, why do you guys do the forecast, even if you're responsible for warnings? And it's really because that helps us maintain that awareness for hazardous weather. So we can provide forecasts as a secondary job. And it covers more than just saying it's going to be mostly sunny and 80 degrees today, which we kind of call our public forecasts. We also issue specialized forecasts for aviation. We help keep things in the FAA running smoothly across the country as far as flights and all that. We also do for fire weather, for whether it be brush fires, forest fires, or just for helping plan prescribed burns to minimize the danger for fire spread across the area. Also for the marine community, that's another big one, especially for us here in Taunton. We have year-round commercial fishing ports, New Bedford, Gloucester especially. Year-round ferry services, example would be, the Steamship Authority going to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. So wide range of customers. We support at our office parts of 4 states, southern New Hampshire, most of Massachusetts, all of Rhode Island, and northern Connecticut. That's called our county warning area. So every weather forecast office in the country has its own county warning area. In all, there are 123 forecast offices, like the one in Taunton, that issue forecasts and warnings around the clock for the protection of life and property. That's why we're there.
That's great, Joe. Tell me a little bit about the Doppler. I noticed that now you guys have your own big Doppler radar. Is that a new furnished one? How old is that, and how does that work as far as radar goes and detecting severe weather, and et cetera?
Sure. Yeah, the Doppler radar is actually about 20 years old. The one in Taunton was commissioned back in 1993, and this was a significant upgrade to the national radar network. For some folks who may have been paying attention to the weather for the past 20 years, we used to have some older network called network radars. These were developed in the 50s primarily, and were the first weather radars across the country. You might remember, fans of the Weather Channel might remember seeing some of the local radars on the old days. Well, this new radar system installed in the early 90s across the country was an upgrade called Doppler radar. And in addition to detecting where the rain or snow might be falling, it also We can detect wind patterns essentially in the atmosphere, or motion within thunderstorms or within winter storms, and really get a sense of rotation for thunderstorms. That's the primary goal, is really to improve severe weather detection. Now, a few years ago, the Doppler radar network was upgraded further with something called dual polarization, and that's a kind of a technical thing, but that allows us to not just look at the size of the particles that are detected, which we did in the past, but also the shape. And that goes a long way into determining rain and snow lines for us here in the Northeast, for tornado debris signatures, especially in the Midwest, but also here in the Northeast. Once in a while we can see those. So the whole Doppler radar upgrade is really, really modernized, how we utilize radar, and especially in the warning process, to alert people for severe weather.
Well, that's great information. So that's good for people to know that they don't know what a Doppler radar is, and you totally rocked it on that answer.
Right. And I should just mention, Peter, each forecast office across the country really has its own Doppler radar. And people sometimes asking you why was the office put in Taunton? It was at Logan Airport for many years. Well, each of the offices was located nearest to the radar, so they wanted a radar in southeast Massachusetts to be able to detect things over the ocean, namely hurricanes, nor'easters.
Right.
So that's why the offices are located where they are.
Okay. Can they put another Doppler out in western Massachusetts, or they rely on the Albany Doppler up there?
Yeah, right now we rely on the Albany and even the one in New York City on Long Island. Now, granted, the coverage isn't fantastic because the lowest we can sample is about 6,000 feet. But these radars are also very costly, and the maintenance is very costly. So actually what the National Weather Service is looking at doing is working with UMass Amherst, which has developed a low-cost network of radars on cell phone towers. It's called CASA. You can Google that if you want to see more information. But that's being demonstrated right. It's called CASA, C-A-S-A, all capital letters. And what that is, it's a low-cost network of Doppler radars that are mounted on cell phone towers. And there is one out in Amherst right now that's being demonstrated, but there's also a network demonstration going on right now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So they're hoping that this supplemental coverage will be used out in data-sparse areas, such as the Connecticut River Valley for us, where we struggle with it. So that may be coming in the next 2 to 4 years. You'll be seeing some of these supplemental radar networks coming in.
Wow, that's great. That's good to know. Joe, you grew up in Oswego, New York. You're a SUNY alumni. Well, tell me and tell my listeners out there what it's like living, I guess I could say, in the snowiest part of the country or in the world. Yep. Actually, you're right in the meat of the lake effect snow machine.
Yeah, well, actually, I grew up outside of the New York City area. I went to college up there, so I spent my 4 years of winter, but that's okay. Yes, State University of New York at Oswego, which is northwest of Syracuse, right on the shores of Lake Ontario, literally. So I spent 4 years up there, and lake effect snow was one thing that I got a lot of experience with, and actually the experience I've drawn forecasting it there, I can apply to ocean effect snows here in New England, so it's been very helpful. But that's a smaller scale phenomenon. A lot of times Oswego itself, if you look on the map, was always in a transition area, so the snow bands would either be coming north through us, last 30, 40 minutes and head to the north, or come down to the south and head towards Syracuse. But only on a couple of occasions did we really get into the meat of a snow band, and it was my senior year. We had 26 inches of snow in about an 8-hour period. I've never seen it snow that hard.
8-hour period?
In 8 hours, 26 inches.
My producer, Tammy, was telling me, because she lives out in that area. She lives out in Syracuse. She was telling me that it can snow 12 inches in an hour out there.
I mean, it's not unusual to see snowfall rates of 4 to 5 inches an hour with that. But the bands can be pretty transitory, meaning they'll move north and move south a little bit. And they're fairly narrow, maybe only 5 to 10 miles wide. But, certainly areas up in the Tug Hill Plateau, you get that elevation, you get that added lift. Those areas always really get the jackpot east of Lake Ontario. Right.
So, what made you get interested in meteorology? Why did you decide to become a meteorologist? Ever since you were a kid growing up, did you love the weather? Was it something you experienced that wanted you to get into the weather? What gives you that kick that then, so we could tell the people out there, the young enthusiasts and the weather geeks out there that want to aspire and they want to be a meteorologist, if you could share that with them.
Yeah, sure. It was kind of all the above. Like I said, I grew up outside of New York City, so, I remember, growing up being in elementary school, the blizzard of 78 down there, which wasn't quite as bad as it was up here in New England, but we still had 2 feet of snow out in New York. I remember the President's Day storm of 83. That was just blizzard conditions, probably one of the best snowstorms I've ever experienced in my life. Outside, again, there's been some good ones up here, but that was the one that really captured my attention. Hurricane Gloria in 86, I remember that as well. So it was just a love of experiencing kind of all that nature had, the winter storms, the severe thunderstorms, kind of everything. I just liked it a lot, and it was kind of a hobby for me. I would take my own weather observations, I'm sure like many folks do. And then I saw it as, hey, this could be a career. So, in the 80s, the Weather Channel first came out, and, they were doing a lot of weather then, and that's really where I kind of learned some of the basics by watching that. I kind of came in contact with some folks at the National Weather Service when I was in high school. At the time, the office in New York was located at Rockefeller Center, which for me was an easy train ride to go downtown to Manhattan. So I would go there and volunteer. I remember reading, doing weather radio broadcasts in the old days. It wasn't a robot voice. It was actually the forecasters who did the recordings. So I would do that. I would meet some of the forecasters, learn from them. And then I just saw, hey, this could be a career. And I talked to some of the meteorologists and learned where they went to school. And, one of them had gone to SUNY Oswego, so I applied there. I applied to Linden State, Penn State, and ended up going, I liked Oswego the best. So it really was a hobby, was an interest. Many of the folks I work with in Taunton, it's the same story. We all had the love of the weather. It was a hobby, and then we saw this as a career. And, I can't tell you, and this is important for any students out there, too, how many times people would tell me, you know what, don't bother, there's not going to be any jobs, you're wasting your time, go into finance, go into something else. You know what, if you like weather that much and you want to make it your career, you go for it. Get experience, all the volunteering you can. I tell people here in the Boston area, contact the TV meteorologist. They do internships. Contact Blue Hill Observatory. Do a volunteer stint there. When you get into college, you can volunteer at the National Weather Service. So don't let the naysayers get you. If that's something you love and you want to do, you do it. You can make it happen, and you can have a very nice career. I've been in, over 20 years. I'm in my 24th year of government service, and I love the job. It's something new every day. I love the people I work with. As I told you, Peter, at the office, I love the technology, what we have to play with, and it's still, it's a lot of fun. It's just a lot of fun.
I mean, you love your job, so and it's a great place to wake up in the morning and be like, I love where I go to work. I love
absolutely,
and it's great.
And like I said,
public.
Right, and it's something new every day. This week we're now in a pattern of dealing with severe weather and flash floods. Well, hey, maybe in a few weeks we'll be dealing with another tropical system, and then before you know it, we'll be back and dealing with the rain-snow line and nor'easters. So it's always something new.
Yeah, we'll talk about tropics in a little bit. Now that we're in the severe weather season. We're in the peak right now, right? It goes until the first or second week in August.
Yeah, pretty much July. End of June into maybe mid to late July is our peak, but we seem to be a little bit delayed this year. There wasn't much activity in May or June at all, and it really wasn't until just before Arthur rolled up the coast that we got really active. So, it wouldn't surprise me if we went into the first week of August as being a little active with severe weather.
So have we been on the lowdown as far as severe weather goes? I mean, we haven't had that many watches across Massachusetts as far as past few seasons have gone severe weather-wise. Is that a reason because maybe our water temperatures are not as warm, or is there something in the climate, or the jet stream not in the right place that's coming into play?
Yeah, it's really just been the weather pattern. We're finally getting a little bit more active here, since the first week of July. But yeah, we're certainly the number of severe weather events we've had this year is a little bit less than, I would say a typical year. Usually we're quite active mid to late June and then into a good chunk of July. So it's certainly been a little quieter than usual.
As far as it's been quiet, what causes the severe weather? Well, we know I live on the ocean. It's nice and cool. In the summertime, we get the sea breezes and we get the marine influence. And a lot of times, the marine influence, Joe, tends to kick the legs out of these severe storms as they approach past Worcester of 495, approaching eastern Massachusetts. With that being said, with a south-southwest wind, sometimes they can withstand the marine influence just a little bit and penetrate closer to Boston. But it's so hard to get a severe storm into extreme eastern Massachusetts. In the future, or do you see anything foreseeable that would change that? Because with a westerly wind, wouldn't that be a drying wind, and that would actually cut the moisture in the atmosphere?
Yeah, sometimes that can. As you know, in Boston, we tend to cook pretty well on a westerly wind because you have the downsloping off the Worcester Hills, so that causes some additional warming. Yeah, really what we want for Boston is a southwest, maybe just west of southwest. I've seen, the main pattern this year has been a southerly wind, which is just no good. When, like you said, once it gets to the Worcester Hills, and it starts to fizzle out, and, we're lucky if we get a few sprinkles, here in the east. So we really want to see, a west-southwest wind. That tends to be our best one in Boston.
Yeah. And I was telling you earlier when I was down at the weather office, I said, is it possible that you can get severe storms? I would think if the dew points were in the 70s, and the temperatures were in the 70s, because that would give you 100% humidity, correct?
Yep.
Could that still mitigate a severe storm, or could it? Is it sometimes that the sea breeze front with the fog at the coastline can sometimes inhibit severe weather, even on the coastal plain? Let's say we're at the beach, it's sunny out, there's a squall line coming in, but, people aren't warned, they don't, we're on the ocean. Can that happen all of a sudden?
Yeah, sometimes, most of the sea breeze front does kind of kill the activity because the air is just, much more stable with the easterly flow. But, in some cases, you can maintain a thunderstorm if the base of it is kind of elevated. If it's unstable, maybe a couple of thousand feet above the ground, the storms can survive that way. So once in a while, that's when you'll see, you're fogged in Gloucester, and all of a sudden you see lightning, or whatever off. The convection becomes elevated, in other words. It's feeding off the instability above that marine layer. So in some cases, it can survive. Yep.
Absolutely. All right, let's talk about the Great Hurricane in 1938. Do you remember that storm? I'm sure all the men in the weather office remember that storm.
That's right. We've got nobody left who remembers that.
But wasn't it the National Weather Service that ruled out it was going to miss? There was a meteorologist that went out in the zone that tried to warn New England about the oncoming storm?
Yeah, you're rattling the memory banks here, but as I recall, the warning time was very short. There was warning, but it was pretty much as the storm was, almost ready for a direct hit. So that was, obviously in those days there was no radar, no satellite, and certainly no numerical models to help you out. But there were warnings, I believe, and I don't quote me on this, but once the storm was already into the Carolinas, and by then we know, we're already feeling the effects up here, or the fringe effects in most cases. Right,
because it goes ahead of the hurricane before it hits. Right. It's usually the process for us up here in New England. That's how it always works out with a fast-moving system, because at the latitudes they tend to accelerate past the Carolinas, the Outer Banks. But as far as the 1938 hurricane goes, that was on September 21st. Was that a big blow to eastern Massachusetts, or did it really hit Long Island a lot more with a lot of smack in Connecticut? Or did Boston record hurricane force winds from that?
Well, Blue Hill did. I believe that was what I almost want to say, was it 186, right, at Blue Hill? And again, don't quote me on that. But, there was, anywhere east of that track, which is, typically what we experience is where you get the wind on the east side of the track and get the heavy rain along into the west, typically with tropical cyclones here. So, it would have been all of Rhode Island, eastern Massachusetts, really got the brunt from this.
Yeah.
As well as eastern Long Island.
Yeah, and the storm surge was, I think it was, 14 to 20 feet? Seriously, was it that high?
I believe so. I would have to look up the specific numbers, but all the wind and the surge was on the east side of that system.
And as working at the National Weather Service, and you tell the public that storm surge is the number one killer, usually or mainly in a hurricane. I think I'm right on that. But as far as the storm surge goes, how far can the storm surge penetrate inland with an excelling hurricane as it's making landfall, let's say, on Long Island or Buzzards Bay, Cape Cod? Because usually the tracks go right up over Buzzards Bay, eastern Connecticut, or eastern Long Island. You never really see the eye come up over the outer tip of Cape Cod or Cape Ann.
Right, and really the key with the storm surge is where is that maximum, kind of envelope of wind. That's the whole key.
Right.
If a hurricane is coming ashore in, say, Narragansett Bay, is that maximum, we start to see the wind become a little detached from the center as it comes up this far north. Is it over Buzzards Bay? Is it over, farther east? Is it offshore of Cape Cod? Like Hurricane Bob, where was the maximum? It was a very narrow envelope of wind, but it was over parts of the South Coast and the Vineyard and Cape Cod. So that's really the key, is to where the maximum storm surge is going to occur in any hurricane or tropical storm.
Right, and the waves on top of the storm surge, how high can they break, depending on the category of the hurricane? Let's say it's a Cat 3 hurricane, you got sustained winds at 110, 150 miles an hour?
I believe so, yeah. Around, yeah. I think so.
And then wait. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was going to say, really, so if you have a Cat 3, the worst situation, the area we're always concerned about, and we've gone out to the communities and the emergency managers, is the upper end of Buzzards Bay. That's just something waiting to happen. If you have a Cat 3, say, come on shore, in Rhode Island, for example, that's the area where you can have your maximum storm surge, 20 to 25 feet, believe it or not, for the Cat 3.
Wow.
So, at high tide, that would be disastrous for those communities. And to their credit, they've listened to us. We've gone almost community to community and worked with each of those areas to make sure they have an evacuation plan, that they know what's going on. That's really the worst case scenario for southern New England would be, that type of situation. Another one could even be for Cape Cod Bay, the north, say Sandwich, that area, the north shore of Cape Cod, would be if you had an offshore storm with the winds, going counterclockwise, would be out of the northeast. Well, pile that surge around and into Cape Cod Bay after the storm departs. That's another potentially bad situation. So there's really a couple of them that can be kind of sneaky on the south coast. And that's why I always tell people, if there's something in the Bahamas with a name, it's your business. That's really what we try to stress to people. And don't focus so much on, the center of where the storm is going. Focus on that error cone that the Hurricane Center gives you, and then and pay attention, because you need to be ready.
Well, yeah, you're right with that. Any kind of storm system that's off of Florida or the Bahamas, that's longitude, latitude area for a storm to come up the coastline. So even if it was going to go northeast, by the time it turns to go northeast up the coastline, it wouldn't be, it'd still be too late. It would still be in our, launch of being hit. With that being said, we go by, and as you all go by, we have a benchmark for storms, usually, winter storms. We get the 40 north, 70 west benchmark. Does that still come in hand with hurricanes as well?
Actually, it doesn't really even make much of a difference. We came upon this kind of with Arthur, because some of the forecasters were kind of trying to give a track of where it was going to go, and someone said, right near the benchmark, and people said, well, that means it's going to be bad, in this area. Well, you got to remember, the wind field in a hurricane is completely different with that of a nor'easter. So, we use that with nor'easters, but with a tropical system, the winds tend to be around the core, and then they begin to spread out as the storm gets north, and it tries to become what we call extratropical, or like a nor'easter. So we want people to really, really focus on not so much where the center is going, but where the wind field is going, where we're putting the storm surge is going, and that error cone again, because we're not that good that we can pinpoint it to one center. So we tell people, don't really focus on where the center of the storm is going, but focus on where the impacts that we're telling you are going to be. That's more important, because you could have two different hurricanes going over the benchmark of 40 north, 70 west, with two completely different impacts on southern New England, depending on where that envelope of wind of maximum wind ends up lying.
Correct, and it also No, I understand, but it also goes by where the high pressure is off the coastline. If we have a strong humid high pressure, it's going to come a lot closer to the coastline. If we get a high pressure over New England, that's usually our blocking front that sends it out to sea, or if the jet stream's cutting through New England, then that usually blocks us from all the storms. People in the chat room are talking about winter, but we're not going to get to that yet. As far as plenty of time, guys. As far as hurricanes, this year's not so busy, but we had Arthur, and I talked last week with Anthony Siciliano on here about the early Hurricane Arthur and how rare that is. Are we going to be watching the southeast U.S. East Coast very carefully, August and September? Is this where we're going to see more energy from the tropics because there's more air there? I haven't looked at any models yet off Africa, so I don't know if there's any African dust coming in off that kind of plays with the circulation up in the atmosphere. What are your thoughts, and what is the National Weather Service thoughts on current thinking as far as the East Coast goes for the hurricane season and where they will originate out of that area?
Yeah, well, I would. Okay, here's the thing: we're in an El Nino year. You know, the degree of which I know there's a lot of discussion about. But for what it's worth, the official outlook is for an average. The odds favor an average, or probably a below-average season for tropical activity, and that's because in an El Nino year, the large scale, I'm talking global scale patterns, really don't favor a lot of what we call the Cape Verde storms, the ones that traverse the Atlantic. But that said, you can still get one or two. That's not off the table. I think the more favorable area to watch is, again, like the Arthur area, off the Carolinas, in the Bahamas, that area. That tends to be a little bit more favorable in the El Nino years, and those are the ones that we have to watch. So, right now we're kind of a little... Yeah. I mean, this year we had an early start. Unusual, yes. Unprecedented, no. But now we're in a little bit of a lull. The Bermuda High is kind of exerting its influence now. We'll see a good warm-up this week. I wouldn't be surprised by the end of the month, maybe into August and September, maybe even later. Could be here we have a later season into October, to see a couple of more of these storms develop. So really, I would focus more on that area off the Carolinas, off the southeast, the Bahamas, in that area. Not to say we can't get one or two big ones coming across the Atlantic either, but certainly the larger scale conditions are more unfavorable for that to happen than they are for something to develop closer to home and come up the coast. But again, does it come up the coast? You need to look at the weather pattern in place. Obviously, the week or two, that happens, and that's unpredictable at this point.
Well, we both know that weather patterns can change to the snap of a finger. They're always changing. Plus, computer models can change overnight. We've noticed that. How trustworthy are you with a computer model as far as the tropics go? Let's say that the whole East Coast was warm, that it was going to miss and go out to sea, but then for some reason it kind of went off course, and then everybody had to go back to nowcasting, which we all use. Watch the radar on the satellite very carefully. Water vapor, pressure drops, all that. Is that in the realm of possibility that that could happen?
Oh, it's always possible. Certainly the models are better than they were, even 10 years ago.
Right.
For the most part, they do a very good job. They handle the large-scale patterns very well, and the interaction, of each. Can something go awry? Of course. It happens all the time. But, that's why we have the folks down at the Hurricane Center. They're the experts. When we get into a tropical situation here, we certainly collaborate. We talk to the forecasters, prior to any watches or warning being issued. But we really rely on their expertise to help us, get the watches and warnings out. And certainly the forecasters there have years of experience in dealing with these systems and kind of know, what kind of the norms are and how the models handle certain situations, kind of more than we do locally.
Right. I'm one that's not, I'm not a model lover. I don't really, when I base my forecast for Gloucester, I don't go by computer models. I kind of experience, because Cape Ann can be a lot different from anywhere else in the world, and Massachusetts and New England. We're an island, we stick out, we have water on all sides. It could be snowing in Boston, it could be raining on Cape Ann, it could be snowing in Cape Ann, it could be raining in Boston, it could be blowing a hurricane here. What makes us stick out